Redditor 1. I've never told this story to anyone outside my immediate family because I always felt it wasn't truly mine to share. It belonged to my father first. But as time has gone by and I've found myself replaying every odd detail in my head, I realized I couldn't keep it tucked away forever. My father himself was never shy about it, though he wasn't one to volunteer the tale to just anyone either. I guess he always figured that people either believed you or they didn't, and there wasn't much point in trying to argue. And to be honest, I've got no proof any of it ever happened. All I can say is that my dad was never one to lie, especially not to me. He had nothing to gain from weaving some elaborate hoax, and the details have been consistent from the time I was old enough to understand words until now, when I'm well into my 20s. So, believe me or don't, but it's burned into my mind all the same. My father grew up in rural Illinois, in a town so small you could drive past it in a heartbeat if you weren't paying attention. Back in those days, he said life was simple. People left their doors unlocked, kids ran around barefoot in the summers, and the nearest neighbor was still a good half-mile away. Across from their land was a big patch of forest that seemed to stretch on forever, a green tangle of old trees and winding dirt paths. The house itself was a bit worn down, a simple one-level ranch with a battered porch where my grandfather liked to sit in the evenings. The way Dad described it, there was always a hush over the fields at night, broken only by a few chirping crickets or the low rumble of a distant tractor. But there was also something else. He said that sometimes, maybe once a week or once a month if you believed Grandpa's stories, you'd see lights dancing above the tree line. They moved too quickly and with too many odd directions to be planes. They were silent, mesmerizing, like someone had pinned laser pointers against the sky. My father and my grandpa treated these sightings like an odd curiosity, not quite daily routine, but not an anomaly either. They'd sit out there after sunset, sipping lemonade or iced tea, and watch these star-like points dart around. He said it was such a common sight that if company came by, Grandpa might even say, "Stick around, you'll see it if you're lucky." Whenever I think about that, I get goosebumps. UFOs or orbs or whatever you want to call them, just the normal backdrop of his childhood. Sometimes my dad recounted other strange things too. Isolated earthquakes that would rattle the house for a few seconds, but apparently didn't register anywhere else in the county. Bright orbs floating low among the trees, and rumors in the area about silent black aircraft drifting overhead. He swore up and down that each time these weird events happened, he felt a hum in his bones, like a vibration under the earth. He'd feel it in his feet when he stood outside, a faint pulse that rattled his nerves. Nothing ever directly harmed him, and by his teenage years, he'd grown used to the bizarre unpredictability of living in that quiet pocket of Illinois. But there was one story that put all the others to shame, one that always made him clench his jaw and narrow his eyes when he told it. It happened when he was about 15 years old. He was home alone one afternoon, hanging around in the driveway, maybe kicking at rocks or fiddling with some chores while waiting for his parents to return from a shopping trip. The day was hot enough that sweat dripped down his back. The trees were still, the horizon shimmering with heat waves. He said even the songbirds were quiet, as though something had sucked the noise out of the world. That's when a long, black car appeared at the far end of the dirt road and slowly made its way up to the house. He noticed immediately how silent it was. No engine sound, no crunch of gravel, no sense of effort from the motor. It just glided up the driveway. It was sleek, tinted windows, not a single mark or scratch. When it finally stopped a few yards from my dad, the driver's door opened, and out stepped a man. Even calling him a man feels wrong. Dad always said he looked too flawless to be real. He was very tall, with pale, smooth skin, light blonde hair parted neatly, and a black suit that looked absurdly well-tailored for a humid Illinois summer day. His expression was a curious sort of childlike smile, like someone seeing color for the first time. At first, Dad was more puzzled than afraid. He'd never seen this person in town, or anywhere for that matter. The stranger's shoes didn't stir up a speck of dust on the driveway. He walked right up to my dad and asked for his name, voice carrying a friendly, almost sing-song quality. Dad asked him why he wanted to know, but the man only said he had a few questions and that he meant no harm. The grin on his face stayed, unblinking. My dad, though he was a pretty down-to-earth kid, felt this gnawing sense that something was off. It wasn't just the man's overdressed appearance or his unseasonal attire. There was an underlying wrongness in his eyes, an excitement that didn't fit the normal rhythms of conversation. The man kept pressing gently. Had Dad seen anything unusual around here? Heard anything? Felt anything? I can imagine the creeping unease building in my father's chest. He told the man, sure, sometimes weird things happened. Lights in the sky, small quakes that shook the property. But Dad was still trying to figure out who this stranger was and why he seemed so desperately eager. And then, mid-sentence, the man's demeanor shifted. The smile vanished as if someone had flipped a switch. He went from cheerful to apprehensive in an instant. Without saying goodbye or offering an explanation, he pivoted, returned to the driver's seat of that black car, closed the door, and sped away, still without making a sound. My dad stood in the driveway, heart hammering, having no clue what had just happened. Minutes later, my grandparents returned from their errands, clueless that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. What's really strange is that this wasn't the end of it. My father finished out his teenage years in that house, watched a few more of those unexplained lights dance around, and eventually moved on to college and adult life. But decades later, 30 whole years at least, my mom was the one who stumbled on something even more unsettling. She was in a bookstore one afternoon, flipping through some magazines, when she sensed someone staring in her direction. She glanced up and spotted two men sitting in the small cafe area near the windows. She said it was as if time froze for her. One of the men was tall, blonde, and unnaturally perfect-looking, dressed in a black suit despite the fact that it was a casual bookstore on a mild autumn day. The other guy was dressed the same way, both of them overly neat, both unwrinkled. Her immediate thought was that it had to be the man my dad described, the one from the story he'd told her countless times. The moment she locked eyes with him, she felt a wave of dizziness, like her brain was screaming, "No way, it can't be him." But the more she looked, the more certain she became. And just as Dad described, the blonde man's expression changed in a blink. He'd been wearing a mild, polite smile while skimming a newspaper, but once he noticed my mom watching him, he stiffened. Then he shot a glance at the other man, and with no further warning, both of them stood and strode out of the bookstore. She said they moved with eerie synchronicity, as if they'd rehearsed every motion. A moment later, they vanished into a side street. My mom was left standing there, heartbeat pounding in her ears, a half-read magazine in her hands, feeling as if she'd crossed some invisible line. She told me later that she was half tempted to run after them, try to get a license plate, a photograph, anything, but fear rooted her to the spot. She didn't know if she'd just stumbled into some bizarre cosmic joke or witnessed something bigger than any rational explanation. When she got home that evening, she told my dad what happened. He went silent, listening carefully, and finally murmured something like, "Yeah, that's him. That's exactly him." They swapped details, the whiteness of his skin, the perfect suit, the unnatural way he stood and moved, the immediate shift from calm to alarmed. Dad's memories flooded back, and for a few weeks, they slept with the windows locked and the curtains drawn. I was too young at the time to understand the depth of their anxiety, but I do recall the tension in the house. The phone would ring, and they'd share a nervous glance before answering. The porch light would flicker at night, and Dad would step outside to check on it, scanning the driveway as if expecting a silent black car to materialize again. Now I'm the one who's grown up, and that sense of the unknown has sort of passed on to me. I've never personally encountered this figure, at least not yet, but sometimes, especially when I'm traveling or out doing errands, I catch myself scanning the crowd for a glimpse of a flawless blonde man in a black suit. I wonder if I'd have the courage to walk up to him, or if I'd end up frozen the way Dad and Mom did. Part of me tries to rationalize it, thinking maybe it's just some freaky coincidence, or my dad's memory took on mythic proportions over the years. But then I think of all the other weirdness that always seemed to hover around my family. The lights, the phantom quakes, the orbs. It's like we've been living in the shadow of something we can't name. I've done my share of reading about so-called men in black, UFO watchers, and government agents who show up to ask cryptic questions. But usually those stories involve intimidation, threats, warnings not to talk. This was something else. Some bizarre blend of naive curiosity and then sudden retreat, as if whatever that man was, or whoever he worked for, couldn't quite manage the social niceties of normal human contact. Or maybe he wasn't so naive after all, and he was just trying to play a part. Either possibility makes my skin crawl. Every so often, I bring it up to my dad and ask if he regrets not pressing for answers, if maybe he should have demanded to see identification or asked directly what the man wanted. Dad just shakes his head and says that there was something in that moment that told him not to push, a primal sense of self-preservation perhaps, the same way you don't poke a sleeping bear or corner a stray dog. And maybe that was for the best. Who knows what might have happened if Dad had tried to keep him there or asked one question too many. All I know is that these stories have a gravity to them, something you can't brush off as idle tales. My father was never a dramatist. He never sought fame or money or any of the usual motivations for tall tales. My mother, too, is as level-headed as they come. Yet they both describe the same uncanny figure, separated by decades and hundreds of miles, as if he stepped right out of one memory and into another. If I ever do see him, I'm not sure what I'll do. Would I run? Or would I stand there pinned by that grin until he quietly left? Sometimes at night, I imagine a silent black car pulling into my own driveway. I picture a tall figure stepping out, too clean, too perfect, tinted windows reflecting the streetlights. I wonder if he'd ask me the same questions. Have you seen anything unusual? Heard anything? Felt anything? And then what? Maybe I'd say yes, my whole family has, and watch the grin fade from his face as he disappeared into the night. Or maybe I'd never get the chance. Perhaps he'd sense me, sense my father's blood in my veins, and leave before I could utter a single word. Either way, the thought leaves me uneasy, because a piece of me thinks it's only a matter of time before the same unmarked car finds me. After all, it found both my parents across the span of 30 years. Maybe there's a pattern I just can't see, and maybe it's too big to comprehend. In the meantime, I live my life, run my errands, lock my doors, and keep an eye out whenever I see a flicker of gold hair in a crowd, waiting for the day that question might finally land on my doorstep. And if it ever does, I don't know that I'll have any better answers than my dad did back then. All I can hope is that when the grin fades, whoever or whatever lurks behind that perfect face will leave me be, just as it left him. Redditor 2. I've kept this story locked away for 23 years, sharing it only in whispered conversations with family. Even now, my hands tremble as I type these words. Some truths feel safer buried, but the weight of silence has become unbearable. I'm omitting certain details, dates, locations, names, not out of forgetfulness, but fear. Fear that somehow they're still watching. It happened the summer before 8th grade, when the air hung thick with humidity and possibility. My best friends, Jake and Marcus, had this brilliant idea to sneak out at midnight. There were these girls from the next block over having a sleepover. Lisa liked Jake, or at least that's what we'd heard through the middle school grapevine. The plan was simple. Walk by their house, maybe throw some pebbles at their window, act cool, typical 13-year-old stuff. The streetlights cast orange pools on the sidewalk as we crept through our sleeping neighborhood. The crickets seemed louder than usual that night, their chirping almost drowning out our whispered conversation. We turned onto Maple Street, not its real name, and that's when everything changed. At first I thought it was a cloud, a weird shadow cast by the moon. But clouds don't hover motionless at rooftop height. Clouds don't gleam like polished gunmetal under starlight. What we saw defied explanation. A massive, black, blimp-shaped craft suspended in the air, completely silent. Picture the Hindenburg, then multiply its size by 3 or 4. This thing was enormous, stretching across at least 4 football fields, maybe 5. The surface wasn't just black. It absorbed light like a void, except where occasional starlight caught its curved hull, revealing that metallic sheen. "You guys see that, right?" Jake's voice cracked. We all nodded, frozen in place. "What the hell is it?" Marcus whispered, but none of us had an answer. Here's where things get hazy, where my memory starts to feel like Swiss cheese. I remember staring up at it, my neck craning, heart pounding against my ribs. Then, nothing. A gap, like someone took scissors to a film reel and cut out a chunk of time. The next clear memory, the massive craft was gone. In its place, a small glowing object shaped like a barbell drifted downward, trailing wisps of luminescent smoke. The sight was almost beautiful in a terrifying way. Then came the trucks, 2 of them, black as the craft had been, with silver equipment boxes mounted in their beds. They tore down our residential street doing at least 70, their engines roaring through the quiet night. Government, military, something else entirely, we never found out. By the time we stumbled back to Jake's house, the sky was turning pink with dawn. 5, maybe 6 hours had vanished. We made a pact to tell my dad he worked for the city and would know what to do. But when morning came, the words wouldn't come. It was like trying to grasp smoke. The more we reached for the memory, the more it slipped away. Years passed. Marcus moved away junior year, and I lost touch with Jake after high school. When Facebook came around, we reconnected, but there was this unspoken barrier between us. We'd comment on each other's posts, like photos of each other's kids, but we never mentioned that night. It was like a wall we both saw but pretended wasn't there. What haunts me most isn't the craft itself, though God knows that image is seared into my brain. It's the silence that followed. We lived in a major suburban area, hundreds of houses, thousands of people. That thing was massive, hovering right above a residential neighborhood just after midnight on a summer weekend. Someone else had to have seen it, but there was nothing. No news reports, no local paper coverage, no chatter at school, nothing on the early internet forums, just silence. Sometimes I wonder if we're all carrying around pieces of that night, hundreds of people bound together by a shared amnesia. Did others see it too, but like us, found themselves unable or unwilling to speak about it? Are there others out there right now, staring at their computer screens, wanting to share their story, but afraid of what might happen if they do? I've considered hypnosis over the years. There's a therapist in town who specializes in regression therapy. But something holds me back. What if what I remember is better than what actually happened? What if those missing hours contain something worse than my imagination can conjure? And how could I trust a stranger with this when I can barely trust myself with the memory? Last week I ran into Jake at the grocery store. Our kids go to the same school now, and we made small talk about PTA meetings and soccer practice, but there was this moment, just before we parted ways, when he glanced up at the sky. A reflexive gesture, probably, but I knew what he was thinking about. I saw it in his eyes. The same fear, the same questions, the same memories trying to claw their way to the surface. I'm writing this now because I need to know if there are others. Not just Jake and Marcus, but anyone who saw what we saw that night. Anyone who's been carrying this weight for all these years. Anyone who looks up at the night sky and feels that same mix of wonder and terror. Because here's what I know for certain. That craft was real. Those trucks were real. And somewhere out there, someone else remembers. They have to, don't they? Some nights, when I can't sleep, I go out to my backyard and look up at the stars. The crickets still chirp their summer songs, but now they sound like a warning. I stand there, watching, waiting, wondering if tonight will be the night it returns. And in those moments, I understand why we've all kept quiet for so long. But I can't stay silent anymore. This happened. It was real. And if you're out there, if you saw it too, know that you're not alone. Just be careful who you tell. Some truths come with a price, and I'm still not sure what ours might be. Redditor 3. My mother wouldn't touch a cigarette now, but on that sweltering July night in 1978, she and her friend Lisa lay back on the hot shingles of Lisa's roof, passing around a single Marlboro and daring each other with teenage dreams. I know because she told me once, after her 3rd glass of wine, how the sky seemed to hum with invisible electricity above Henderson County, Illinois, the sort of hum that vibrated through your bones and made even cicadas sound muted. Back then, Lisa's house stood alone on a stretch of cracked pavement, maple trees shading the battered wood siding. Mom, 16, wild-eyed, slid out of the bedroom window, her bare feet landing on curled shingles. Lisa followed, her laughter echoing against the silent fields. They settled near the chimney, kicked off their shoes, and watched the horizon grow dusky pink. That's when the light came. No plane, no shooting star, just a pulse of color, liquid and fierce, rippling across the sky. Mom still calls it liquid brightness, a wash of violet pink that trembled beyond reason. One moment the heavens were deepening to indigo. The next, that color bled through the clouds like stained glass. Mom took a drag on the cigarette, thinking it was some new kind of fireworks. Then everything went blank. When she woke, the moon had slid sideways by a third of its arc. The night air felt damp. Dew had soaked her jeans. The cigarette was a stub between her fingers. 3 hours had vanished. "Lisa just froze," Mom said, staring into her wine. Her eyes went white-hot and distant. I shook her, but she only whispered, "I don't know," and crawled inside. They drifted apart after that. Life pulled them in different directions. Mom moved away that fall. Lisa dropped out of sight. In hindsight, Mom regrets never checking Lisa's room for scorch marks or secret diaries. But at 16, strange nights are easy to forget over prom dates and college applications. Then, 10 years later, they met again at a high school reunion. Mom scanned a crowd of familiar faces, jocks, classmates, misplaced bangs, and froze when she saw Lisa. Everything about her was the same: straw blonde hair, heart-shaped face. Yet those eyes, they shone with calm so deep it might have been carved from marble. They shared coffee in a cafe near the old shop where they once bought mixtapes. Lisa leaned forward, voice soft as moth wings. "I remember it all now. 4 times they took me." She paused to stir her drink, the spoon chiming against porcelain. "They showed me the stars. They taught me what lies between light and dark." Mom's hand shook around her mug. Lisa spoke of paralysis, of cold instruments, and then, miraculously, of conversation, not with words, but with images and feelings. She'd seen galaxies birthing themselves, felt the pulse of planets waiting to be born. She'd learned her own future, a child she never carried to term, a promise broken in 1992. "They tried to save her," Lisa said, eyelids fluttering as though watching some distant scene. "But fate runs deeper than they do." Mom refused to believe it at first, but the nightmares began, cold metal against her skin, voices humming behind her eyelids, shadows that moved even when the light stayed fixed. Dad tried to wake her, but she'd lash out, furious at whatever unseen hands held her fast. "You'll understand someday," Lisa whispered, pressing their old friendship into something sacred. "When you remember, the truth will be beautiful." After that reunion, Lisa vanished again. No forwarding address, no calls. Mom's nightly terrors eased into restless slumber, but her eyes lost their spark. She locked the windows, kept the porch light on. At family dinners, she fidgeted, scanning the night beyond the lace curtains, as though expecting someone to step into the room. Last Christmas, a card arrived from Lisa. Smooth white stock, no return address. Inside, beneath neat handwriting, a single line: "They say it's almost time." Mom shivered when she read it. Her reaction was raw enough that Dad dared not ask. For nights afterward, Mom slept soundly, no nightmares, no tremors under her feet, just a serene calm that sank into her bones. She even smiled at sunrise, as though greeted by an old friend. But yesterday I found her in the backyard at dusk, staring west. The sky was a bruise of purple, the first stars shyly blinking into existence. I called her name, and she turned with that same dreamy serenity. Eyes soft, lips curved in an unreadable smile. "There," she said, nodding toward the horizon. "I feel them." A tremor rippled through me, that same hum my father once felt on those Illinois plains. My pulse snapped tight. I thought of Lisa's words, of the lost hours, of the probes and the promises of knowledge beyond human ken. Mom took my hand, and for a moment I felt the warmth of her skin pulse beneath mine. It was a heartbeat not her own, alive with secrets I wasn't yet ready to learn. When I tucked her in later, she held my face with both hands. "Don't be afraid," she whispered. Her voice carried that odd, sing-song lilt I'd only ever heard when she retold her teenage tale. "They only want to show us the beauty of what lies between the stars." I laid awake under my glow-in-the-dark stars, listening for the hum. It came at midnight, low and insistent, vibrating through the floorboards. Outside my window, I saw nothing but the hush of trees. Yet I knew, just as Mom did, that something watched from beyond, waiting for its moment to return. I haven't slept well since. I catch myself scanning the skies whenever I'm outside after dark. I wonder if next time, when the light breaks open the night, I'll stare in rapture like Mom. Or if I'll run and never look back. Because I understand now that some truths are beautiful and terrible all at once, and once you've glimpsed them, there's no unseeing. And if they come calling again, I'm not sure I can bear to watch. Redditor 4. 10 minutes past 10, I felt it before I saw it. A prickle along my spine, like someone had whispered my name in the dark. My Civic coasted along two-lane highway, cornfields humming past in the strobe of my headlights. The clock on my phone glowed 10:53 p.m. when the red and blue flashed in my mirror. I eased the wheel to the right, heart thundering, and pulled onto the gravel shoulder. My breath fogged the window as I reached for the glove box. Insurance, registration, license. The ritual Dad drilled into me during endless driver's ed recitals. But as soon as I clicked it open, those lights winked out. No cruiser, no flashing beacon, only darkness and the hiss of my own pulse. At 10:56 p.m., the chaos began. The radio sputtered through static, volume surging and collapsing like a heartbeat gone rogue. My dome light flickered in time with my headlights, painting the cab in an epileptic glow. The corn outside jumped and twisted, shadows pirouetting across the stalks as if they'd come alive. I groaned. This was classic electrical trouble, so I yanked the hood release. My fingers brushed the lever and everything snapped away. The next thing I knew, I was staring straight up at a sky so full of stars it felt like the universe had pressed itself against the night. My jacket tightened, my jeans were damp with dew, and the air bit at my cheeks. My phone lay beside me, face down in the grass. I pushed myself upright, joints popping in protest, heart hammering so loud I was certain the fields themselves could hear. Where had my car gone? Had I even opened the hood? Panic bloomed as I scanned the stalks. 10 feet tall, cut down to stubble. No road, no guardrail, only rows of cracked earth stretching to the horizon. My hands trembled as I patted my pockets. Wallet, keys, phone, gone. Fear took me by the collar. My chest tightened into a fist, and I shoved off into the stubble. Each footfall crunched, jolting pain up my calves. My pulse hammering, I stumbled toward a pair of headlights gleaming like distant beacons. No thought crossed my mind but finding the asphalt again. Signs materialized out of the black, 350th State and 50 West. My legs ached, but I pressed on. The markers told me I'd walked a half-mile through those endless cornfields. At 2:17 IEM, the headlights resolved into my Civic, parked exactly where I'd left it. Its engine lay silent, the interior was dark. I hissed the lock button on my fob. Nothing. Every system was dead. I climbed in, fingers shaking on the wheel. My phone lay on the passenger seat, screen lit with the time. 3 hours, 21 minutes of vanished existence. My head dropped to the steering column, mind buzzing with questions that had no answers. How do you walk for hours without memory? Why did my legs feel like I'd sprinted a marathon? I waited 30 minutes in that dead car, the cornfield chorus replaced by my own ragged breathing. Finally, I dialed AAA, voice brittle as I fumbled the roadside assistance routine. The operator's calm words echoed in the empty night, each syllable stretching into eternity. By the time the tow truck arrived, 2 hours later, the sky had started to pale. The driver, stoic as ever, offered no insight, just clipped questions. "Battery's dead," he said. "You lost power." I settled into the passenger seat for the ride home, watching the fields pass at a crawl. Every stalk looked the same, every mile marker indistinguishable. My mind darted with half-remembered flashes, the strobing lights, the hum in the wiring, that nameless dread. When I finally opened the front door, Dad was waiting, his face soft with concern. I told him I blew a fuse, that I must have shorted something. He didn't push further, no lectures, no scolding, just a silent nod and a careful wrap of my coat around my shoulders. Weeks later, I calculated my walk at a sane pace, 10 minutes tops, not 3 hours. I searched the shoulder for footprints, torn stalks, anything. Never a clue. The cornfield was pristine, like no one had ever trudged through it in the dead of night. I've driven that stretch countless times since then, always fingering the clock on my dash. The Civic's electricals have never glitched again. The radio stays steady, the lights burn true. But once in a while, on nights when the air feels thick and the road is empty, the dash flickers. The radio hums a ghost note. And in my rearview mirror, I swear I see taillights blinking in rhythm, red and blue, though no cruiser pulls alongside. My uncle, who taught me to navigate by the stars, tells me to be grateful I only lost time. You could have lost more, he says, voice low over the farmhouse table. He's worked these fields for decades and believes the land itself remembers. He says the night sky watches us, but sometimes it reaches down to remind us how small we are. I keep a journal now. Each night drive ends with a note. Time departed, time returned. So far, I've kept each entry neat and uneventful, yet I dread the moment I write, flashes, or hum again. Because I can't unfeel that vibration, can't unsee those dancing shadows, and I can't shake the certainty that somewhere in those missing hours, I glimpsed something beyond the edge of our world, and some part of me wanted it to stay. On clear nights, I still look up, tracing constellations I once knew by heart. The stars hang heavy, patient as ever, and, if I'm honest, I'm waiting for that hum to rise again, that flicker in the wiring, that sudden glimpse of red and blue behind me. Because a question lingers in the hush of those fields. If the universe can borrow 3 hours of your life, what else might it take before it's done? Redditor 5. I pulled off the 2-lane and killed the engine at exactly 1:02 a.m. The map on my phone still glowed with those coordinates scrawled across the screen. 38.7421 DGN, 90.3297 DGW. I'd typed them in a panic this morning, barely believing they were real. Now I sat in the hush of my Civic, engine warmth fading, staring at corn stalks whispering in a faint breeze. The world behind the windshield looked entirely ordinary. A gravel driveway turning into a rutted path, a cluster of rusted silos rising against a moonless sky. My headlights picked out splintered wood where an abandoned barn must once have stood. If this was sleep deprivation or a prank my own mind had played, it was impressively detailed. 1:10 AIEM. I stepped out into the cold, every shadow in the stubble field thrumming with expectation. My pulse hammered as I squared my shoulders and followed the gravel toward the silos. I'd forgotten to bring a flashlight, because of course I had, so I held my phone above my head, its weak beam stretching only a few feet ahead. Half my brain urged retreat, half demanded I go on. A tremor of adrenaline ran up my spine as I passed beneath the nearest silo, its steel walls stained with age. 1:14 IM. The ground shifted underfoot. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I looked down to see a new set of digits glowing on the screen. 1:14 IM. Beneath them, not an incoming call, but a typed message. You came. I spun around, heart in my throat, but the silos ringed only empty fields and the distant hum of cicadas. My breath came in short bursts. I texted myself, "Who is this?" The reply came before I could slip my phone into my pocket. We are not alone. 1:18 AIEM. I pressed forward. My father's voice echoed in my head, monologues about crop circles and government agents who meant no harm. His passion for the unexplained was usually endearing. Now it felt like a prophecy. I reached the barn's remains, splintered boards leaning in stuttering angles, windows empty back like watchful eyes. The air smelled of rust and earth. Pieces of ribbon, bright orange and frayed, draped the rafters, fluttering in a wind I couldn't feel. Every nerve in my body screamed to run back to the safety of streetlights, to pretend the coordinates were wrong, that the scratches on my forearm were from my cat, not whoever or whatever had written them. 1:23 AYEM. The ground hummed beneath my boots. A deep, steady vibration that felt less like a sound and more like a pulse. I sank to my knees by a patch of bare dirt, and there it was. A perfect circle, pinkish in the starlight, edges raised like the lip of a shallow bowl. The earth inside was smoother than the surrounding soil, disturbed recently. My fingers hovered above the circle's rim. I pulled out a penknife, my only tool besides my phone, and tapped one finger on the disturbed earth. The circle rippled under my touch, as if liquid. My heartbeat thundered so loud I thought it would crack my ribs. 1:27 a.m. IEMS. Before I could pull back, the air snapped electric. A flash at the barn's far end, a thin line of bluish light slicing the night. I blinked, and the head of the barn glowed from within, as though someone had turned on a lone bulb. But no power lines ran here. My phone dropped in my other hand, swinging its light. I saw silhouettes, 4 figures, standing in a row. Too tall and too still to be human. Their features dissolved in the shadows, but their heads tilted toward me in unison. My throat clogged with panic. I checked my pockets. No keys? My phone slipped from my fingers as I stumbled back, feet tangling in ribbon and stalks. The figures advanced, slow and deliberate, limbs too straight to bend naturally. The humming rose to a resonance that rattled my teeth. 1:30 a.m. I tore back toward the car, heart beating a runaway drum. The ground flipped unpredictably under my feet. Every step was a gamble. I didn't look back until I slammed into the passenger door and fumbled the lock. The dashboard clock glowed 1:31 a.m. as I slammed the door shut and twisted the key in terror. The engine turned over immediately, as though eager to flee. My headlights swept back across the field. The barn was dark again, the silos silent. No figures, no glowing barn, no circle of disturbed earth. Only the hush of night. 1:33 a.m. I tore down the gravel road, corn whispering against the windows. My phone buzzed in the cup holder where I'd tossed it. I glanced at the notification, a new text. "Thank you for coming." I swerved into a ditch, heart lodged in my throat. I pressed the brakes until the Civic shuddered to a stop. I couldn't go on. I didn't want to. But the message burned on my screen, the dead silence around me, the echo of those head tilts. My hands trembled as I switched the engine off again. The phone buzzed one more time. "We'll be waiting." I sat in the darkness, unable to will my breath to slow. Somewhere beyond the corn, past the circle in the dirt, there were things watching, curious, patient, and impossible. The coordinates had been no mistake. They'd been an invitation. Now I'd opened the door, and there was no turning back. I thought of Dad's Ancient Aliens marathons, of every explanation I'd clung to. None of it mattered here. Science, logic. They were fragile bulwarks against a night that reached through the veil between worlds. And now the veil was thin, too thin to hold. I know what I'll do. I'll drive back tomorrow in the light of day, and the circle will be nothing but an odd furrow in the dirt. But tonight, I stay. Tonight, I wait with the pages of my journal open on the passenger seat, ready to record whatever comes next. Because I've learned that sleep paralysis isn't the only thing that can steal time from you. Sometimes, it's the stars themselves reaching down to claim it. And tonight, the stars have found me. Redditor 6. The horizon cracked open in a wash of white smoke that morning, stretching up like a fist punching through a velvet ceiling. By the time we rolled into the staging area, Engine 47's 4 rusty Type 6 rigs lining up under grid GN 142, my throat was already dry. The sun hovered low on the scrubby sagebrush, promising a scorch so relentless I could almost taste it. "Load your packs," our incident commander barked. "Stay sharp." That was standard. Fire shelters, fuel pumps, water tanks, check, check, check. Yet, as I clipped my helmet strap and glanced back down two-lane highway, nothing in our routine explained the 8 black choppers drifting onto our tail like vultures, drawn by a hidden scent. They sailed in without a whisper or a contrail, perfectly exposed against a sky too pale to register their presence. Martinez radioed, half laughing, military convoy or swan song, but his grin didn't reach his eyes. By 9:04 a.m., we'd hardly unpacked when the calm blew apart. The smoke column, once a modest gray wisp, shot straight up in a thunderous plume, snaking 200 feet before vanishing into an electric haze. The blast struck like a buried charge, rattling axles and rattling the ground underfoot. Engine 47 to IC. What in hell was that? My voice trembled over the crackling radio. Silence, then, "Restricted area control. Evacuate, now." I didn't wait for questions. The engines roared to life, tires spitting gravel as we peeled away toward Cedar City, 200 miles on the clock. No one spoke until we'd left the proving grounds behind, ghostly choppers dissolving into the desert heat. By midday, we were pulling hot shots on a cold burn. Embers tucked against roots and rocks near a forlorn highway overpass. At 2:35 p.m., I kicked a smoldering log into ash and replayed every heartbeat. The silent helicopters, the piston-like blast, and that impossible craft I'd glimpsed at the smoke's edge. That night, we huddled in the slate bar with amber pints, sweating in frosted glasses. Thompson, our crew chief, leaned in with gravity in his dark eyes. "You saw it too, didn't you?" he hissed. I nodded, voice raw. "What was it?" He tapped the table once, steel on wood. "We're witnesses. If the logs disappear tomorrow, we'll be the only ones remembering." He wasn't kidding. A week later, I dug through the incident reports. The southern burn had no entry. Cedar City mop-up was listed as maintenance idle. It was as though our engines had never left the barn. Since then, every time sagebrush crackles under a hot wind or lightning stitches the peaks, my blood hums. I dream of the mantis-shaped craft, flat, obsidian, edges blurred as if reality itself had smudged it. I recall its underside, empty wells glowing with stolen light as if powered by darkness. Last Wednesday, while hammering loose debris on the Cottonwood Ridge fire, my radio spat static at 11:07 a.m. Unidentified aerial activity reported near GN 142, dispatch intoned. I froze, brush in hand, as 8 black choppers rose over the summit, gliding through pine needles like ghosts on the wind. My crew stopped dead, hoses dripping foam. I watched those shadows circle us, 8 silent predators in perfect formation. Every instinct screamed retreat, but Thompson's words echoed. "They'll hide the real show in the distractions." Tonight, sleep eludes me. The desert wind rattles the window screen, each shutter echoing like distant rotor wash. My EMT buddy swears it's just adrenaline and PTSD. He's seen dust devils masquerade as mysteries. But I've learned to trust the fire and the smoke, and I don't misread their tongues. Dawn will find me back on Tulane, engines lined up once more, the morning air already hot. We'll scan the skyline for columns that ripple like broken mirrors. We'll strain for rotor wash that isn't there. And if those phantom helicopters return, I'll aim my hose not at the blaze, but at the heavens. Because this fight isn't always against flames. Sometimes the enemy burns above us in the silent thrum of machines that bend the desert air to their will. And next time they come, I won't be surprised. I'll be ready to call their bluff and to remind them that even in the fiercest inferno, the ground still belongs to the living. Redditor 7. The car's digital display blinked 78 DGF as Mom steered us south on I-75, the late September sun washing the dashboard in gold. I clutched the edge of my Michigan sweatshirt, too warm for Midwest sunshine but too proud to swap it for something lighter. Mom wore her favorite green blouse, pearl buttons catching stray beams of light as we talked about Aunt Sarah's old china patterns, the way lilies wilted in dry air. At exactly 3:47 p.m., the radio switched from a soft ballad to static for a split second. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, but nothing was there. I laughed it off, just a signal glitch. Mom glanced back at me and smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. The world felt perfectly ordinary. A minute later, though, ordinary snapped. Through the passenger window I saw it first, a gleaming half-disc slicing across the bright blue. Its curve was too precise, too smooth to be a cloud reflected in sunlight. We both froze, the engine's hum drowning in our stunned breaths. "Mom, do you see?" My throat felt suddenly tight, words trapping behind my ribs. She didn't answer, only nodded, lips parting in the shape of my own unspoken question. We watched as the object hovered a hair's breadth above the horizon, surface shimmering like quicksilver. Traffic slowed around us. A few cars veered into the next lane, drivers craning their necks. I caught a kid on a skateboard, frozen mid-kickflip, eyes wide. The craft stayed motionless for 13 seconds. I tasted copper on my tongue, felt my heart pound so hard I thought the seatbelt might buckle under the force. Its dome reflected the sun, blazing back at us in stolen light. I blinked, afraid to lose the image. At 3:51 p.m., it winked out. No fade, no whoosh, just vanished, as though someone had erased it with a cosmic finger. The sky snapped back to ordinary blue. Cars resumed their pace. The skateboarder dropped to his knees, hands pressed over mouth. Mom exhaled a shaky laugh. Did that really just happen? My nod was all I could muster. For miles we drove in silence, both of us tracing phantom lines where the saucer had hung. The next exit brought a fast food joint. On a whim, Mom pulled in. Inside, under flickering fluorescence, we stared at our paper trays, half-eaten fries growing cold. "I can't call Dad," she whispered. "He'll think we're crazy." I began to argue. "Grandpa always believed you when you told him anything," but she shook her head firmly. "Not yet." That night, I lay in bed with the window cracked, listening to crickets and the distant hum of highway traffic. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by flashes of silver light dancing behind my eyelids. When morning arrived, I scanned the sky, hoping for another glimpse, some proof. There was nothing. Over the years, the story followed me like a shadow. Freshman year of college, I mentioned it in passing to a friend obsessed with astrophysics. He raised an eyebrow, eyes flashing interest, then launched into a lecture about weather balloons and atmospheric mirages. I listened, nodding politely, but the memory in my bones refused to apologize for its vividness. I began to jot things down, timings, colors, the taste of fear, until the notebooks stacked themselves tall on my desk. I devoured every book on UFO sightings, every decade-old news clip, looking for someone, anyone, who saw the same thing that afternoon on I-75. Online forums offered tales of flickering lights and missing time, but never that blinding, perfect disc. Mom and I kept our pact. We discussed it only during sleepless nights, her voice low as a confession. I'd tell her about a bright dot that darted over my apartment last spring. She'd reveal the time she awoke to low humming outside her Florida window. Each tale carried the same hush, wonder laced with terror, the secret thrill of knowing we'd glimpsed something beyond. Last month, she called me just after sunset. "I saw it again," she said, breathless. "A light, white at first, pulsing orange, skimming over the water." Her voice trembled with that old mixture of awe and dread. I pictured her on the balcony, Great Lakes moonlight painting her silhouette. "Describe it," I urged, already halfway into my car, map app open for I-75. She paused. "It moved like it was reading the bay's edge," she said. "And when I blinked, vanished." I didn't try to explain. Instead, I asked the only question I knew I needed answered. "Do you believe it's the same one?" Her silence stretched into the line. Finally, "I can't stop wondering what they're looking for." I turned the key, engine roaring below the dashboard. Behind me, the road stretched out silver and black. Ahead, the sky hung low and empty. In my rearview mirror, I saw headlights appear, another car weaving through the dusk. I eased onto the highway, pulse synced to the rattle of tires. Somewhere above the treetops, I imagined, that disc waiting, patient as a predator. I thought of Dad's laugh, the way he'd call us dreamers. But I knew better. Once you've seen the impossible, you can never unsee it. When the dashboard clock clicked 7:03 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Mom, 3 simple words in pale blue bubble. "They're still out there." I left my blinkers on. The road ahead was empty, the sky above infinite, and I drove into the dark, watching every shadow, waiting for the light that might never come again, and knowing I'd never stop looking. Redditor 8. The air was still, unbroken except by the distant call of a whippoorwill, when I slipped out the back door for a breath of cool night air. The thermometer on the porch read 58 degrees, chilly for late May, but perfect for stargazing. I'd just finished my shift at the veterinary clinic and needed a moment alone. Uncle Frank's farmhouse sat a mile from the nearest neighbor, wrapped in cornfields that hummed under the moonlight. It seemed impossible for anything else to intrude on that silence. I leaned against the weathered railing, the wood grain rough beneath my fingertips, and tilted my head skyward. Stars peppered the black canvas above, and I felt a childlike thrill tracing down my spine. I loved this place, the way I could almost feel the pulse of the universe when I stared long enough. Tonight, I was hunting meteors, hoping to catch a flash of light streaking across the sky. At 11:03 p.m., I spotted something unusual. A single point of light drifted slowly from east to west, moving with the lethargic pace of a satellite. I followed its path until it hung directly above the old oak at the field's edge. Then it stopped. My heart jerked. Satellites don't pause. I blinked, rubbed my eyes against the cold breeze, and blinked again. The light remained fixed, as if anchored to an invisible rail in the sky. My breath caught between ribs. The world seemed to tilt. A beat passed, then two. Then the thing shot off at a sudden angle, about 45 degrees, toward the horizon. It vanished in a blink, the speed defying anything I'd ever seen. My knees felt weak. I sank onto the top step, hands trembling in my lap. The only sound was the rustle of leaves behind me, the whippoorwill's lonely lament echoing through the night. I couldn't decide whether to be exhilarated or terrified. My lungs ached for oxygen, panic and wonder warring in my chest. I tried to steady my breathing. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, a trick of the stars or fatigue after a long day, yet the imprint of that unnatural pause, how it had hovered, refused to fade from my mind. I glanced at my phone. 11:06 p.m., battery at 12%. No photos, of course. I never expected to capture a low-res blob on camera. What I wanted, what I needed, was someone else to see it, to validate that I hadn't lost my mind. But the farmhouse was dark behind me, windows shuttered, doors locked in sleep. No one else was awake to share this. I stood again, brushing straw from my trousers, and wandered down the narrow path into the field. The rich scent of damp earth rose around me, the ground soft under my boots. My pulse throbbed in my ears. What if it returned? What if whatever it was, it had noticed me? At 11:10 p.m., I reached the oak tree. Its gnarled limbs stretched into the sky, nearly touching the stars. I pressed my palm into the bark, still warm from the day's sun, and stared upward. For a moment, nothing moved except the wind playing through leaves. Then, high above, another light appeared, smaller this time, but still bright. An ember drifting among distant constellations. My breath hitched. I raised my phone, pointing it skyward, but the screen glowed blank. The ember hesitated, then dipped behind the tree line. My stomach churned, as if I'd been handed a glass of sour milk. My rational mind screamed satellite or drone, but the memory of the first sighting pressed down on me like a physical weight. I turned back toward the porch and froze. Alongside the barn roof, just visible in the moonlight, moved yet another light. This one larger, colder, and unnervingly close. It hovered there for 3 slow seconds, its glow clear against the shingles, then slipped behind the eaves and out of sight. I staggered forward, heart hammering like a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil. The cornfields around me felt alive, shadows twisting at the edges of my vision. I blinked, and the farmhouse windows brightened for a fraction of a second, an amber glow flickering behind each pane, then went dark again. I bolted for the porch, hands scrabbling for the railing as if it were the lifeline between me and that incomprehensible sky. Inside, the house felt cavernous and cold. I flipped on every light, the sudden glare jarring my eyes. The hairs on my arms prickled. "Nightmare?" Uncle Frank's muffled voice drifted down the hallway. He'd come out, rubbing his eyes, still in his work overalls. "I saw something," I whispered, voice raw. "Out back. In the sky." He didn't laugh, didn't shrug. He simply nodded and led me to the den, where the old ham radio crackled faintly. I'd never heard him use it at this hour before. "They've been out there a long time," he said, eyes shadowed with something like resignation. He adjusted a dial and static soothed the edges of his voice. "People see them at night. Silent. huge as barges, some say, floating, then gone. My pulse throbbed. He'd believed the same rumors, those cement container stories of silent shapes overriding the sky. I'd laughed at them as a kid. Now, every creak of the floorboard sounded like footsteps approaching. "I don't know what they want," he continued, voice low, "but they know we notice." Thunder rolled somewhere far off, though the sky above was perfectly clear. My stomach knotted, a cold dread pooling in the pit. The radio crackled again, and beneath the hiss I thought I heard a faint hum, too regular to be wind. I swallowed, voice caught as if in a vise. "Are they coming back?" He didn't answer for a long moment. Then he said, "Sometimes they do. Sometimes they just watch." I stared at the radio, the night's hush pressing against the windows. The world outside had shifted. The cornfields and oak trees no longer felt familiar. I realized I would never shake this memory. The hover, the freeze, the abrupt departure, I would never reclaim that sense of safety under the stars. Only one thing felt certain. Once you've seen the impossible drift across a country sky, you can't unsee it. And whether they watch us out of curiosity or something darker, they've left their mark on me, an unshakable awareness that, in the quiet of a perfect night, I am not truly alone.